Okay, yeah, no problem. Okay, yeah, no problem. Wait, does he start or do I start?
Find
Go
out.
for it.
Well, I was told you wanted to talk to me, so yeah, I don't know how much longer I'm going to stick around. That last 45 minutes or whatever, that exchange, that was brutal. Hopefully they don't go like this often, because I thought I would be interested in this venue, but that was horrible.
Well, with you and Darth's dishonesty, I doubt it.
Whoa, hey, chill.
Who was that?
No. I'm not saying it against his character. I'm saying his arguments are. That's it. Not trying to be rude.
All right, this is the moderator. We're gonna let Destiny ask this question to Sai.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, so
I'll be out.
My problem with the presuppositionalist position is that I feel like the validity of your axiomatic assumptions are equal to mine. So, for instance, I say that I assume, logic or reason or causality, and you say that somehow you can define some precursor to that. But it feels like when we get into an actual discussion about this, your definition or your ability to perceive God's revelation or something is just as arbitrary as any other axiomatic foundational belief. How do you respond to that?
I don't know if you were here earlier when we talked about the difference between certain branches of presuppositionalism, but it would be a Clarkian who would say that our foundations are axiomatic, but I would not say that. My foundation is not an unjustifiable axiom. Mine is a necessary presupposition, which is proven by the impossibility of the contrary, as revealed by God.
Okay, when you say proven by the revelation of God, how do you know that you are receiving a revelation from God?
The same way you do.
Well, can you tell me how you do?
The same way you do. Well, the thing is, I say that God makes us certain of some things. He makes us certain of things innately. He makes us certain of things via our sense and reasoning. And I would say the only way that you can argue against that would be by saying it's impossible for God to exist. Now, the God of the Bible, if you want to say it's impossible that he exists, we can go there. But the God of the Bible makes us know things for certain. And that's my foundation. That's the foundation of my worldview.
Okay. Do you acknowledge that your worldview is circular, or do you reject that?
It is absolutely circular, but as Van Til would say, it's more of a spiral. He would say it's a virtuous circle rather than a vicious circle. And the thing is, I mean, you would have to admit that all worldviews at their foundation are circular. Like if I were to ask you...
I totally admit that, but the issue is it feels like the presuppositionalist pretends that their circle is more perfect than another one, which is what I don't understand.
Well, here's the question. This is how out of that circle. I would ask you, is it impossible for God to exist? And if you say, no, it's not impossible, well, according to Christian worldview, God reveals things to us such that we can know them for certain. So that's how we escape the circle, because we appeal to something that's outside of that plane. We appeal to God in order to justify our reasoning. So I'm not saying I reason that my reasoning is valid. I'm saying that God intervenes and makes us know that our reasoning is valid.
Yeah, but in order for you to perceive the teachings of God or to perceive anything from God, you would have to justify the existence of your senses. The senses are the ways that we gain information of the outside world. So I don't understand how you can justify trusting your senses. For instance, if I were to pose to you the question, how do you know there's a God and not a great deceiver? You would have no way to discern between those two things, no?
No. I'm not saying that I necessarily justify them. I say God justifies them. God makes us know things for certain via our sense and reasoning. He makes us know things certain through innately. He makes us know things. So how God does that is really irrelevant. So in order for you to argue against that claim, you would basically have to say it's impossible for God to exist. And if you're saying that, then we can go there. If you're not saying that, I'm not trying. I'm sorry. I don't mean to cut you off. No worries. Go on.
So I'm not trying to say, so my position, if you were to ask me if God exists, I wouldn't say yes or no. I would say that we can't have knowledge of that necessarily. We just aren't equipped to have knowledge of whether or not God exists.
Yeah, I understand that. But then of the two of us have an avenue to certainty, whereas you say that you have one, I'm all ears.
Why do we need an absolute certainty for anything?
Well, I'm saying that I have an avenue to certainty. I'm saying without that you can't even justify one knowledge claim to even 0.0001%. So, I understand that people, they don't like the idea of going to certainty, or they're saying that it's not necessary. I think that there's huge problems with that. But I'm saying that without God, you can't even know anything to 0.001%. And if somebody wants to say that they do, I'm all ears.
Yeah, so I think the reason why people have an issue with that is because what you're saying seems to, and I'm not trying to make an accusation, but it seems to fly in the face of how we understand most systems of logic or rationale. For instance, we can take an arbitrary axiom and then we can build arguments off of that. And those arguments will be valid if they adhere and conform to that particular system. You don't have to justify the axiom in order for the truth claims past that axiom to be justified, because whenever you're justifying a claim, you're always doing it in relation to a specific axiom. So for instance, if I say 2 + 2 is 4, I'm not saying I have absolute knowledge that the entity 2 plus the absolute knowledge of the entity 2 combined will equal the absolute knowledge of the entity 4. I'm saying with respect to what we assume, mathematics and those assumptions to be, that would equal 4. I think that's how most people talk, right? Like it's a form of contextualism.
Right, but the thing is, you're invoking many axioms. You're invoking an axiom that your cognitive faculties are functioning properly. And I would say without that you can't even base anything off of any axioms. So, that would be my question. And I know people don't like when I do that, but then I would say, well, how do you know that when you reason about axioms, that your cognitive faculties are functioning properly?
Well, sure. And I mean, this is, this would be something that, is it Descartes who had the demon or whatever? I would argue that I can only exist assuming that I exist and assuming that my senses are true. It's possible that there could be, somebody creating an illusion before me, but I don't make an absolute knowledge claim about that. And I would argue that my ability to do so is the equivalent to yours, because yours is ultimately reducible to circular logic anyway, right? So if somebody would ask me, can you prove, that everything you see isn't a dream or isn't an illusion? I would go, no, I can't have any knowledge of that. So I'm going to function as though, it's not a deception, but I can't truly make a claim one way or the other. And I would argue that you're in the same boat as me.
Right, but you would be arguing that from a boat where you can't know anything. And as far as Descartes goes, I'm sure you're familiar with Bertrand Russell's refutation of Descartes, because he would say, I think, therefore I am. But it was Bertrand Russell that pointed out that he was begging the question, because his first premise was, I think. And his conclusion was, therefore I am. But he was assuming his existence in the first premise by saying, I think. In order to not beg the question, his first premise should have been there's thinking going on. And you cannot get from there to I exist.
Well, yeah, but I mean, when you say that God's revelation reveals himself, that's also begging the question, right? If you admit that your foundational logic is circular, then that's by definition begging the question as well, right? That's where we all are. We can't possibly justify things outside the boundaries of human knowledge, right? Like, where does logic come from? I think that's the issue with that. I don't want to say an atheist, but that's like a non-religious person would argue there are certain things that exist outside the boundaries of human logic that we just can't justify, like causation. But that's just it. We just can't make claims one way or the other. For you to retreat to a position of circular logic and then pretend that you've justified all of that, I don't think that's a fair position to take. And then to take issue with anybody that doesn't make the same type of knowledge claim, that they have their own circular God that justifies a position or whatever.
No, I understand what you're saying. However, when I say that my foundation is ultimately circular as yours is, I'm not saying that I'm begging the question. I'm not saying that I'm committing a logical fallacy when I appeal to God, because, like I say, unless you are going to say it's certain that God does not exist, then you would have to concede an avenue to certainty to me, and that's what I'm basing it on. And you are free to reject my claim. You might call it question begging or whatever. I say it's not question begging; it's necessarily circular. However, according to my worldview, I have that avenue to certainty. I say, well, what's yours?
Yeah, and I would just say I don't need that avenue to certainty to make any claims past that.
Right, but is that a certain?
You don't need it.
Exactly. Is that a certain knowledge claim?
No,
And that's where we run into the problem.
Certain. Of course not. I would never claim to have certainty one way or the other.
Really?
Yeah, but those are all certain knowledge claims, even though you deny them. But I would say it doesn't even matter, because I'm saying that unless you start with God, you can't know anything to any degree, to any percentage.
Yeah,
and that's why
this is like this is kind of this is the fallacy. This is the line of thinking that I don't like that presuppositionalists engage in. This idea that if I can't justify an act, this is like the primary disagreement. If I can't justify an axiom, every statement that I build off of that axiom is necessarily invalid. I think that's a ridiculous claim.
Look, I how do you know anything? That's all. How do you know anything without God?
Well, like, so So I think that you're kind of playing this kind of word game where you're saying, how do you know anything? And you're trying to pretend that's a really simple question. That's not a really simple question. Anybody that's ever experienced an altered state of not mind on a psychedelic, anybody that's ever been in a coma or when you're in a dream, the question, how can you know anything? That's actually an incredibly difficult question to answer. And you pose it as kind of like a matter of fact, like, well, LOL, how can you know anything? When the
Well,
reality is we can't.